The morning sun cast long shadows across the military compound as Sarah Martinez adjusted her medical kit for the third time. At 26, she had already seen more combat zones than most seasoned soldiers, but today felt different. The Navy SEALs team she was assigned to support looked at her with barely concealed skepticism. To them, she was just another medic, someone to patch up wounds and stay out of the way when the real fighting began. Team leader Commander Jake Wilson barely acknowledged her presence during the briefing. His eyes swept over her small frame and focused on the maps spread across the table. The mission was straightforward on paper. Infiltrate a compound in Afghanistan where high-value targets were believed to be planning an attack on American forces. Intelligence suggested minimal resistance, maybe a dozen poorly armed fighters. Sarah's fingers moved across the captured machine gun with the confidence of someone who had trained extensively on foreign weapons systems. Her medical background had taught her to work quickly under pressure, and that skill translated perfectly to combat operations. She could see 3 more machine gun positions that were keeping her team pinned down, and she had a plan to neutralize all of them. The key was timing and precision. Sarah began her assault by targeting the ammunition supplies at each position rather than the fighters themselves. Her medical knowledge told her exactly how to create maximum disruption with minimum casualties. Explosions began rippling across the hillside as carefully placed shots detonated stored ammunition. Commander Wilson heard the explosions above and realized that somehow their situation was changing. The devastating fire that had kept them trapped was becoming sporadic and disorganized. He still couldn't see what was happening, but he recognized the opportunity and began moving his team to better positions. Sarah's assault on the enemy positions was methodical and devastating. Years of studying trauma medicine had taught her to identify critical vulnerabilities in any system, whether human or mechanical. She applied that knowledge to dismantling the enemy's defensive network piece by piece. From her elevated position, Sarah could coordinate the battle in ways that ground-level fighters never could. She used hand signals to guide Commander Wilson's team toward gaps in the enemy lines that only she could see. The SEALs began moving with renewed confidence as their impossible situation transformed into a winnable fight. The enemy commanders were struggling to understand what was happening to their carefully planned ambush. Their communications were being disrupted by someone who seemed to understand their positions better than they did. Fighters were abandoning their posts as their ammunition supplies exploded and their defensive positions became untenable. Sarah's medical training had included extensive study of battlefield psychology and the effects of sudden trauma on unit cohesion. She was deliberately creating chaos that would cause the enemy force to fragment and lose coordination. Her attacks weren't just tactically sound, they were psychologically devastating. As the enemy's defensive line began to collapse, Sarah made her way back down to rejoin her team. The tunnel system that had allowed her to reach the elevated positions also provided a safe route back to friendly forces. She emerged behind the SEALs' defensive position carrying captured intelligence and equipment that would prove invaluable. Commander Wilson's expression when Sarah reappeared was a mixture of amazement and respect. In less than 20 minutes, she had single-handedly turned a desperate situation into a tactical victory. The machine guns that had pinned them down were silent. Enemy fighters were retreating in disorder, and the compound was secure. The intelligence that Sarah had gathered during her assault revealed the true scope of what they had stumbled into. The compound wasn't just a staging area for attacks on American forces. It was a major coordination center for enemy operations across the entire region. Her medical training had taught her to recognize and preserve important documents even in combat situations. As they waited for extraction, Commander Wilson finally took the time to review Sarah's complete military file. What he found explained everything he had witnessed. Sarah Martinez wasn't just a medic who had gotten lucky. She was a highly trained special operations specialist who happened to have medical qualifications that made her invaluable in multiple roles. Her official designation as a medic had been part of a program that embedded specially trained personnel within regular units without revealing their full capabilities. The idea was to provide enhanced support that could adapt to unexpected situations exactly like the one they had just survived. Sarah's background included training with multiple special forces units, advanced weapons, and tactics courses, and specialized education in combat psychology and battlefield intelligence gathering. Her medical certification was just one part of a skill set that made her one of the most capable soldiers in the theater of operations. The extraction helicopter arrived to find a completely transformed battlefield. What had been a deadly ambush site was now a secure area with valuable intelligence and minimal casualties. The mission that had seemed doomed from the start had become one of the most successful operations of the deployment. During the flight back to base, Commander Wilson's team looked at Sarah with newfound respect and understanding. They had learned that assumptions about someone's capabilities based on their official role could be dangerously wrong. Sarah had saved all their lives by being far more than what anyone expected. The after-action reports would eventually reveal the full impact of Sarah's actions. The intelligence she had gathered led to the disruption of enemy operations across multiple provinces. Her tactical decisions during the firefight became required study material for special forces training programs. But, for Sarah, the most important outcome was simpler. She had proven that when the situation demanded it, she could step beyond her assigned role and do whatever was necessary to protect her team. The SEALs who had dismissed her as just another medic now knew they had served alongside someone truly exceptional. The 12 minutes of combat that changed everything became legendary within special operations circles. It demonstrated that the most dangerous assumptions in warfare are the ones made about friendly forces. Sarah Martinez had shown that sometimes the person you least expect to save your life is the one who has been quietly preparing to do exactly that. Years later, when Commander Wilson was asked about the most impressive display of combat skills he had ever witnessed, he would always tell the story of the medic who went silent for 12 minutes and single-handedly turned defeat into victory. Sarah Martinez had redefined what it meant to be a force multiplier in modern warfare. Sarah had learned not to take the dismiss the enemy had them pinned down with crossfire from elevated positions that made movement nearly impossible. Commander Wilson realized they needed to take out the machine gun nests on the hills before they could even think about escaping. His team was trained for these situations, but the terrain and enemy positioning made their standard tactics ineffective. Sarah finished treating Petty Officer Martinez's shoulder wound with speed that impressed even experienced combat medics. But instead of staying in the medical role, she grabbed her rifle and moved to a position where she could observe the enemy's defensive setup. What she saw made her stomach tighten with concern. The fighters weren't just randomly positioned. They had created overlapping fields of fire that would cut down anyone trying to move between cover points. Worse, she spotted what looked like prepared charges along the walls that could bring down their only defensive positions. This wasn't a hastily arranged ambush. Someone had been planning this trap for weeks. Commander Wilson's attempts to coordinate a fighting withdrawal were failing. Every time his men tried to move, accurate sniper fire forced them back into cover. They were burning through ammunition faster than they could afford, and extraction was impossible with enemies controlling the high ground. The situation was becoming desperate. Sarah made a decision that violated every rule about medic behavior in combat. She approached Commander Wilson during a brief lull in the firing and laid out a plan that stunned him. She had identified a route through the compound that could get them behind the main enemy positions, but it would require someone with specific skills to clear the path. Her plan involved using the compound's own layout against the defenders. Sarah had noticed that the buildings were connected by a series of maintenance tunnels that the enemy hadn't bothered to guard properly. These tunnels could provide covered movement, but someone would need to go in first to clear out any defenders and disable potential booby traps. Commander Wilson's first instinct was to refuse. Sending a medic on what was essentially a solo assault mission went against everything he had been trained to believe. But, as another burst of machine gun fire chipped away at their cover, he realized they were running out of options. His team was tough, but they were trained for direct assault, not the kind of infiltration work that Sarah was proposing. What Commander Wilson didn't know was that Sarah had been preparing for exactly this kind of situation for years. Her official military record showed standard medic training, but her unofficial education had been far more extensive. During deployments, she had volunteered for every advanced course available, learning skills that most medics never needed. Sarah had trained with explosive ordnance disposal teams, learning how to identify and disable improvised devices. She had worked with intelligence units, developing skills in reconnaissance and stealth movement. Most importantly, she had spent countless hours with Special Forces units, absorbing tactics and techniques that weren't part of standard medical training. As she prepared to enter the tunnel system, Sarah's hands were steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. She carried a suppressed pistol, flash grenades, and tools for disabling electronic devices. Her medical knowledge gave her an advantage that pure combat soldiers didn't have. She understood exactly how to disable threats quickly and quietly. The first tunnel was dark and cramped, forcing her to move slowly to avoid making noise. Sarah's training kicked in as she navigated by feel and limited vision. She could hear enemy fighters above her, their voices carrying through thin walls as they coordinated their attack on the pinned-down SEALs. 20 feet into the tunnel, Sarah encountered her first challenge. A fighter had been positioned to watch the entrance, probably as backup security that the main force had forgotten about. He was looking the wrong direction when Sarah emerged from the shadows behind him. Her medical knowledge told her exactly where to strike to render him unconscious without permanent damage. The tunnel system was more extensive than she had expected. Sarah found herself moving through a network that connected not just the main buildings, but also led to the elevated positions where the machine guns were destroying her team's defensive options. This was her chance to turn the entire battle around, but it meant taking risks that no medic was supposed to take. As she climbed toward the first machine gun position, Sarah could hear Commander Wilson's team returning fire sporadically. They were conserving ammunition, which meant they were preparing for the worst. If her plan failed, they would likely be overrun within the next few minutes. The pressure was enormous, but Sarah had learned to function under stress that would paralyze most people. The machine gun nest contained 3 fighters who had never imagined that anyone could approach them from behind. Sarah's appearance was so unexpected that she had neutralized 2 of them before the third could even turn around. Her movements were precise and efficient, informed by medical knowledge of human anatomy and combat training that few medics possessed. Taking control of the machine gun position gave Sarah a commanding view of the entire battlefield. She could see positions that had been invisible from ground level, including several groups of fighters preparing to flank her team's defensive position. The SEALs were about to be surrounded, and they had no idea what was coming. Sarah's next decisions would determine whether her team survived the next few minutes. She had proven that she was far more than just a medic, but now she needed to demonstrate tactical skills that would save all their lives. The battlefield was about to change dramatically, and Sarah was the one holding the power to change it. From her elevated position, Sarah could see the entire enemy force layout. There were more fighters than anyone had estimated, positioned in a complex defensive network that had been designed to trap exactly the kind of assault team that was currently pinned down below. But the enemy had made one crucial mistake. They had never planned for someone like Sarah. Eve attitudes personally. Throughout her military career, she had faced the same assumptions. Her quiet demeanor and focus on medical training made others believe she was just there for support. What they didn't know was that before becoming a medic, Sarah had completed advanced combat training that most regular soldiers never experienced. Her file contained commendations that few had bothered to read. The helicopter ride to the drop zone was tense. The 6-man SEAL team reviewed their tactics while Sarah checked her medical supplies one final time. She carried more than just bandages and morphine in her pack. Hidden beneath the medical equipment were items that regulations technically didn't allow medics to carry, but Sarah had learned that survival often required bending rules. As they approached the landing zone, the pilot's voice crackled through their headsets with concerning news. Drone surveillance had detected more movement in the area than expected. What intelligence had described as a small outpost was showing signs of being heavily fortified. The team would be going in blind, facing unknown numbers with limited backup. Commander Wilson made the decision to proceed. They had trained for worse situations, and the mission was too important to abort based on uncertain intelligence. As they fast-roped down into the darkness, Sarah felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came before combat. The SEALs moved with practiced precision, but she noticed something in their formation that concerned her. They were positioning themselves as if this would be a standard raid, not accounting for the possibility of facing a larger force. The compound sat in a valley surrounded by rocky hills that provided perfect cover for defenders. As the team approached the outer perimeter, Sarah's trained eye caught movement in positions that the others had missed. Years of studying battlefield medicine had taught her to notice details that others overlooked. The way shadows fell incorrectly, the absence of normal sounds, the positioning of seemingly random objects that could serve as weapons caches. She tried to signal Commander Wilson about her observations, but he was focused on maintaining radio silence and following the planned approach route. The team moved forward, confident in their superior training and equipment. Sarah followed, her medical training warring with combat instincts that were telling her this mission was about to go very wrong. The first shots came from 3 directions simultaneously. The SEALs immediately took cover behind a low wall, but it was clear they had walked into a carefully planned ambush. The intelligence had been completely wrong. Instead of facing a dozen fighters, they were surrounded by what sounded like at least 30 well-positioned enemies with automatic weapons and possibly explosives. Commander Wilson's voice was steady as he called for immediate extraction, but the radio crackled with static. Something was jamming their communications. They were on their own, outnumbered and outgunned, with no way to call for backup. The mission that was supposed to be routine had become a fight for survival. As bullets whistled overhead, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. She set down her medical kit and reached for equipment that none of the SEALs knew she carried. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, assembling tools that would help even the odds. The team was about to discover that their medic had skills they never suspected. The first SEAL was hit within minutes of the firefight beginning. Petty Officer Martinez took a round through the shoulder and went down hard behind their defensive position. Commander Wilson looked toward Sarah, expecting her to crawl over and provide medical treatment while they continued fighting. Instead, he watched in amazement as she provided covering fire with accuracy that rivaled his best marksman. Sarah had positioned herself where she could see the muzzle flashes from enemy positions that the others couldn't identify. Her medical training had taught her anatomy and precision, skills that translated perfectly to marksmanship. While treating wounded soldiers in previous deployments, she had also learned to read battlefields in ways that pure combat soldiers often missed. The SEALs were beginning to realize that their assumptions about their medic had been completely wrong. As enemy fire intensified and their situation became more desperate, Sarah was proving to be far more than just medical support. She was becoming their best hope for survival in a situation that was rapidly spinning out of control.